Um, it is 7 o'clock, and so we like to stick to our schedule and get started. I'm scanning for our treasurer, because we usually start with our treasurer's report, but I do not see him. Anyway, I hope everybody had a good summer. One of the things that we at the BNCA did over the summer, really earlier in the summer, but was, as many of you know, to spruce up the garden near the Brookland sign at 12th and Rhode Island Avenue. And it is looking great. I actually just rode my bike by there this evening, and the plants are coming in nicely. Here's just a little shot of the left-hand side of the garden, and these are all native plants. We've got a little irrigation system going here, thanks to Ed, our recording secretary, who lives right there. Anyway, just wanted to share that. And thank everybody who contributed to that, several local businesses and volunteers. I see, I thought I saw Laura Warby there, who helped us out quite a bit. And big thanks to Amanda Freyer for really spearheading that project. It's looking great, and more to come. I also would like to introduce Steve Farrells, our vice president. Renee McCrae is our volunteer coordinator. Ed Kent is our recording secretary, as I mentioned, and Fred Jackson is our member at large. Those are the officers who are here. Like I said, normally we do a treasurer's report, but our treasurer seems to not be here yet. We met last week and did go over the monthly statements, and things are looking pretty good, but I'd prefer to have him present the status of our accounts. I believe our ending balance for the month was about $6,000, and that was after the donations we got for the garden, the expenses we had for the garden, and also $1,000 contribution donation from the BNCA to Noyes Elementary School to purchase some rugs before the school year started, to replace ones that were vandalized at the end of last year. And we did that in partnership with Councilmember Parker's office. Okay, so tonight our agenda, hopefully you saw, and is why you're attending, is we are very pleased to have representatives from the offices of planning and of zoning, and as well as our former BNCA presidents, to talk about planning and zoning in the city, and how our civic association can be involved. We, of course, development in the neighborhood is a big priority of the association. We've been involved in a lot of things, which we'll hear about later. But we really thought it would be good to really educate ourselves on the rules and regulations to the extent we can, and see how we can be involved. And over the summer, we had a really great presentation by Bob Molesky, who's a local resident and historian, talking about Brookland's history, and really appreciated all that has developed in the neighborhood over the past 100+ years. Next month, we hope to talk more about the historic preservation aspect of development in the neighborhood. And as you know, we hear from developers from time to time when there is something being planned, and they would like to inform the community, maybe get community input. And so we will be hearing from a developer for the 10th and Michigan Brookland Lanes project next month. And then at the end of this meeting, we would love for folks to stay on if you have time to provide any feedback about the WMATA proposal for the transit facilities. We plan to submit written feedback by the end of this week and would love to incorporate people's feedback. But for this first part of the of our meeting, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Farrell, who's really organized our speakers, our panel, and take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, and just to reiterate a few of the things that Kathy said, with there's a lot of development either ongoing or proposed or even recently completed in the Brookland area. I think most notably, sort of Metro's proposal to redevelop the area around Brookland Station, the proposal to redevelop the area around Atlantic Electric and the shopping center next to it into Brookland Lanes. And we at the BNCA will often get questions from members of the community about ongoing development, and kind of wondering how they can stay informed and what they how they can be involved in the process. So as Kathy mentioned, that would be useful to do really sort of like a baseline level setting of some of the aspects of the city's approach to development, from kind of the planning and historical preservation down through down to the zoning that influences what can be built within our neighborhood, and in terms of size, density, et cetera. So we're fortunate tonight to have representatives from the Office of Planning and the Office of Zoning to give a little bit of background on those things. And then after that, we're Caroline Petti, so former president of the BNCA. We'll talk a little bit about the BNCA's involvement in some of the planning efforts that have gone on in the Brookland area, around the recent revisions to the comprehensive plan, the small area plan from 2009, and just the kind of the general experience around community engagement and the planning and zoning process. So the way we'll like to do this is we'll start with the Office of Planning, and then move on to the Office of Zoning, and have Caroline kind of provide a wrap up at the end. What I'd ask, given just that we've got a couple of different presentations, and I think we've got a lot that we'll want to get through tonight, what I'd like to do is get through the presentations and hold questions to the end. We'll set aside maybe 10-15 minutes for questions. If you think of anything, please put it in the chat. If it turns out that we can't get to all the questions tonight, what we'll do is we can follow up with our government representatives on the phone if there are any any questions that didn't get addressed. So I guess without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Matt Jessic and David Maloney from the Office of Planning. Matt or David, I'll kind of defer to you on who starts. But well, actually, Matt, are you going to talk more from the planning side of things, and then David focusing on the historical preservation side?
Well, yeah, I can start off if that's okay with you, David.
Sure.
Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I represent the Development Review Division within the Office of Planning. And I thought maybe I could just tell you a little bit about what we do and how we look towards the comprehensive plan for a lot of our guidance. So again, I'm in the Development Review Division. So we look at a variety of projects, everything from, your neighbor wants to build a back deck and they need a rear yard special exception, all the way up to major planned unit developments, things like Monroe Street Market, or, as big as the Wharf. If they need some sort of special approval, they will come through our office, and we will work with either the Board of Zoning Adjustment or the Zoning Commission and advise them on what action they should take regarding those applications. So the smaller types of applications, special exceptions and variances, those will tend to go to the BZA, the Board of Zoning Adjustment. The larger ones will go to the Zoning Commission usually. I know in Brookland there have been some, let's say, medium-sized developments along 12th Street, small apartment buildings. Those will often go to the BZA as well for specific areas of zoning relief. So for the BZA, there are specific criteria laid out in the zoning regulations for special exceptions and variances. And we will review those and write a report and present that to the board. Similarly, for the zoning commission, there are specific standards in the zoning regs themselves that tell the commission how to evaluate an application. And that's really where the comprehensive plan comes in, as well as small area plans.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, I think somebody was not on mute. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So yeah, the comprehensive plan is really the major guidance document for the zoning commission when evaluating PUDs or applications like design reviews, which is what the Brookland Lanes case is. They also look at map amendments. There's a map amendment proposed right now at 701 Michigan, just on the west side by the Arts Walk. So they look at a variety of applications, but all of them, the commission needs to find that the application is not inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. That's the language that's used. So we will do our own evaluation of that and advise the commission on how they should look at an application, and they can agree with us or not. I think they tend to value our input, but they're free to disagree with us as well. So that's a quick look at the development review division, but I'm happy to go into as much detail as you would like about our processes or what have you, or specific projects in Brookland. I may know about the Brookland Lanes or the map amendment for that, for an example, but happy to answer any questions at that time.
Thanks, Matt. I'd suggest let's go to David, and then we can go over to the Office of Zoning folks, and I think maybe once we've looked through all of that, we could come back with some questions towards the end.
Okay, thanks. It's great to be here. I'll do sort of the same as Matt did for the Historic Preservation Office, to cover maybe four things. One is just sort of the basics of our program, the purposes of the DC Preservation.
Get rid of a bunch of risks.
Please mute yourselves.
Sorry, not sure what that was, but nonetheless, I wanted to talk about the historic preservation planning, and also a little bit about the initiatives that we're undertaking now. First of all, in terms of the basics of the program, the DC Preservation Program is perhaps unique in the nation because it is a combined local and state historic preservation program. All of the states have state historic preservation offices. Most municipalities have some kind of certainly large ones have some kind of a preservation program, but in DC, both the state and local functions are combined into one program. What that means is that in addition to the normal local regulatory process that municipalities operate, we also have the federal preservation programs that our office manages and implements. Those include survey and recognition of historic properties throughout the jurisdiction, listing of properties in the National Register of Historic Places. We review federal government projects, and also importantly, are obligated to do education and outreach on preservation. That's something that's not required under the local preservation law, but is under the federal law. And we actually have what I think is the advantage of being able to combine those in the same office. Importantly, also, there is a federal requirement for us to do historic preservation planning, and that obviously fits well within our structure within the Office of Planning. And actually, as part of the same division that development review is in. Right now, there was just a small reorganization, and the division that we are in is the division of development, urban design, and development design and preservation. So it has the development review staff, the urban design staff, and the preservation staff. So a little bit about the preservation law, which is the basic law that we operate under. This is a little bit comparable to the comprehensive plan that guides the work that the Development Review Division does. For us, it's the DC Historic Landmark and Historic District Protection Act, which sets out the preservation procedures that regulate historic properties. And the basic purposes of that law are to, first of all, identify what historic properties are. It establishes the Historic Preservation Review Board, gives them the function of identifying historic properties. It includes among its purposes to retain and enhance historic properties. And also something that perhaps people don't focus so much on is also an equivalent of to the mandate for retaining and enhancing historic properties is to encourage their adaptation for current use. What that means is that is equally as important as retaining and enhancing historic properties. So as properties are adapted for current use, of course, that involves alterations, additions, new construction within historic districts. And the law provides that those changes should be compatible with the character of either the historic district or the historic landmark that is being affected. So these are the legal tests that are comparable to the tests in zoning for not incompatible with the comprehensive plan. There is a little bit of a higher standard with respect to historic landmarks, which are individually designated buildings as opposed to contributing buildings within historic districts. For landmarks, since they are presumably more important, they stand on their own as historically significant. The law does include among its purposes to restore historic landmarks. So for example, if a landmark has had incompatible alterations over the years, the law does encourage restoration of the landmark to its compatible with its historic character. Now, I'll go into maybe some of the mechanics of the how the preservation law works, maybe in response to questions, so I can sort of tailor it to things that you're particularly interested in. But one thing I will say that is important to the preservation procedure is that it is intended to give communities and community organizations a role in the process as voices for people in the community. Most of the comment to the Historic Preservation Review Board typically comes from either community organizations or ANCs. So we are very much aware of the interest of community organizations and are very attuned to wanting to establish and maintain a very good working relationship with any community organization that's interested in participating in the preservation process. So we're happy to do that with you, obviously, as well as the other community organizations that are particularly active, among them the Capitol Hill Restoration Society, in DuPont Circle, the DuPont Circle Conservancy. There are organizations in many of the historic districts around the city that do participate actively in the preservation program. We also give regular public notice of our meetings. Anyone can get on the mailing list, and it will give you a heads up about things that are coming through our system for a public hearing. But also there is a certain amount of communication that goes on between us and permit applicants before cases get to HPRB. And we are also very much interested in making sure that community organizations and other interested parties are aware that there are these preliminary discussions going on. And it's helpful for us sometimes to have, often to have some sense of what issues the community organizations may have with proposals that are coming in front of the Historic Preservation Review Board. A little bit about preservation planning. Obviously, the comp plan does include a preservation element. And as I think probably you all know, the comp plan is being revised soon, starting in 2025. And the revisions will affect historic preservation as much as all of the other elements of the comp plan. One of the things that is likely to be a little bit more important moving forward with the new version of the comp plan, which is by mandate, going to be shorter than the existing comp plan, and more modernized in its structure, the same way that many cities around the country are modernizing the structure of their comp plans. The thing that will be perhaps different about that is that by federal mandate, we are required to do a DC historic preservation plan. The current plan, which has been adopted, is the historic preservation plan for 2025. 2025 is the end year of that plan. So at the same time the comp plan is being updated, we will be updating the historic preservation plan. The important thing about the preservation plan is that it is likely to be more important relative to the comp plan, because it is a vehicle that is designed to be more specific about initiatives, about particular actions that might be foreseen over the 5-year term, to have more detail than is really appropriate in the comp plan. And since one of the issues with the current comp plan is there's so much in it that really doesn't need to be in the comp plan, the historic preservation plan is a good place to put that more detailed information. Another thing that is worth saying is that in the most recent update of the preservation element, one of the provisions that was added as a policy element was to encourage voluntary preservation. This is something that you would think might have been in there already, but it was interesting in some of the reviews that we got from other agencies about the components of the preservation plan. Somebody pointed out, well, it doesn't say anything about voluntary preservation. Now it does. And I think that is something that we take very seriously, because a large part of our program is the recognition that voluntary preservation is the way that most buildings are preserved, and we certainly want to address that. And finally, a bit about our initiatives. They are largely, or at least in part,
Hey, that was a shocker.
reflective of that role of encouraging voluntary preservation. So in order to accomplish that and to prepare for the new comp plan, what we're doing is updating the series of ward heritage guides that we did in the past 10 years to create a new series of community heritage guides, which will not be, they're not defined by the boundaries of the wards, but they're defined more by logical development areas, reflecting the way that the city developed. So that rather than a Ward 5 heritage guide, there will be an Upper Northeast heritage guide, and so forth. Those heritage guides will be very similar to the ward guides, but will have more detail, and more detail specifically about potential historic resources, not only resources that are currently designated, but also there will be a more in-depth analysis of the entire district to identify potential resources in the area. That will allow us to create a historic resources map of the district for the first time, that shows not only designated landmarks in historic districts, but also shows potentially eligible historic landmarks and districts, and other properties that are just noteworthy in terms of their historic character or architectural character. And then the last comment I wanted to make is about cultural diversity studies. We are very, very active in trying to broaden the recognition of historic resources in the district, and to make sure that there is a more balanced representation of all aspects of the district's heritage. So as a result of that initiative, this frankly is going on nationwide. We have been active in getting grants from the National Park Service to study a whole series of themes. We started with 20th century African American civil rights, LGBTQ history. We're doing women's suffrage, Asian and Korean, Chinese and Korean history, Latino, and women's suffrage. And we have most recently got a grant from the National Park Service to study historic African-American affordable housing as a historical phenomenon. So all of that is pointing to, again, the future of trying to make sure that we're in a good position to provide the backing and background information for the comp plan rewrite.
Great. Thank you very much, David. That was a really great overview of the historical planning process and some of the initiatives you had. And I know we had a comment in the chat from Caroline. I think we'll, with everyone's deference, we'll come back to that at the end because I'd like to move on to Sharon Shellen and Kira Mellert from the Office of Zoning. Sharon or Kira, would you like me to bring up the slides, and I'll maybe let you
Yes.
drive from there?
Yes, please.
Give me 1 sec, because I am.
Do you need me to share, Steve?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Hmm.
Thanks, Kathy.
Kira, you're going to start it off?
Sure. My name is Kira Maylard. I'm a senior zoning specialist with the Office of Zoning. I specifically support the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and I'm joined by Sharon Shellen, who is the Secretary to the Zoning Commission. And so we've put together kind of a quick presentation on really a high level of zoning in the district, what zoning is, as well as kind of how the Office of Zoning fits in with the whole zoning process in terms of the BZA and Zoning Commission. So some of this might be familiar to some of you, but we just wanted to kind of give a high level look. You can go to the next slide. So again, very simply, what is zoning? Zoning is the process of dividing land into zones to either regulate uses that are allowed or conditionally allowed or prohibited, as well as some of the physical aspects of structure, such as bulk size, placement of buildings, which we call the development standards. And we'll touch briefly on that in a little bit. You can go to the next slide.
So as far as the participants in the zoning process, those who have been involved in a zoning case probably know all of these, but for those who don't, we have the Zoning Commission who adopts and amends the zoning regulations and the zoning map. They also hear contested cases like plan unit developments. Most of the time you'll hear the term PUDs or design review cases. The Board of Zoning Adjustment, known as the BZA, hears cases related to requests for zoning relief and appeals of administrative decisions related to zoning. The DC Office of Zoning, also known as DCOZ, we provide the professional, technical, and administrative support to the Zoning Commission and the BZA for their oversight and adjudication of zoning matters in the district. Next slide. Then we have the Office of the Zoning Administrator. A lot of people get us mixed up with their office because they just hear the word zoning and that's all they hear. But the Office of the Zoning Administrator is within the Department of Buildings, and he administers, or she administers and enforces the zoning regulations as well as all of the Zoning Commission and BZA orders. And the ZA also handles code enforcement. The Office of Planning, as Matt already spoke about, is the central planning agency for the district. And they also submit written recommendations on cases before the ZC and the BZA. And of course, you have the advisory neighborhood commissions who are volunteers, and some of them put in a tremendous amount of work. They are elected bodies comprised of officials who provide formal citizen participation and review of neighborhood at the neighborhood level. Next page. And Department of Transportation. So they also submit recommendations on the BZA and Zoning Commission cases with regard to transportation in the area of a project. Then you have the Commission of Fine Arts, Old Georgetown Board, Historic Preservation Review Board, the State Historic Preservation Officer. These bodies may provide analysis of impacts on the historic district or landmarks. Next slide.
So these are all of this is how essentially the zoning regulations are organized. And these were just updated actually in a text amendment passed by the Zoning Commission that became effective at the end of last month. So some of the names of the zones might look a little bit different, but essentially the main takeaway here, I won't go through all of them, but it basically goes from least dense to most dense. And so residential, there's a lot of R zones in Brookland. These are low density, single family dwelling units on one lot. And then as you go up to residential flat, you have maybe 2 principal dwelling units on a lot. Residential apartment, you have more apartment buildings, and then obviously mixed use, you have a mix of uses. And those are organized, also have specific zones based on some of the neighborhoods throughout the district. And then production, distribution, and repair. There's some areas in Brookland that have that zone that's kind of close to the train tracks, that has a lot of development around what I can't think of the word right now.
Like warehouses.
Yes.
Warehouses.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have the neighborhood mixed use, which is more, again, specific neighborhoods in the district, the downtown area, and then special purpose zones, which things like St. Elizabeth's, Capitol Gateway, arts districts, Walter Reed, things like that. You can go to the next slide. And this is a list of essentially all the different use categories. So like we said, zoning is divided into development standards as well as uses. And so these are all some of the different uses that are covered in the regulations, depending on the zone that you're in. Next slide. So again, the development standards, this is usually relating to the physical aspects of structures, and it varies again based on the zone. So looking at things like lot width, lot area, lot occupancy, the height of buildings, floor area ratio, yards, penthouses, number of units, things like that. So those are all governed or dependent on the zone that a project is located in. Next slide. So how zoning works, again, very simple definitions here, but you might hear the term matter of right. And so when a property owner wants to either build something on their land or establish a new use on their property, if it says in the zoning regulations that allows this use or is within those development standards, then the property owner just needs to go apply for a building permit or a certificate of occupancy with Department of Buildings, or I think it's the DCLP, and they don't need to get any zoning relief. Next slide. However, if the zoning regulations do not allow a project as a matter of right, that's where our office comes in and the Board of Zoning Adjustment or Zoning Commission would get involved, and the property owner would need to submit an application to be granted relief from either the ZC or BCA in order to move forward. And so and we'll talk about the different types of cases that we see, but these can be special exceptions or variances, which are specific to the BZA, or larger projects such as PUDs, design review with the Zoning Commission. Next slide.
And you can go to the next one. So we'll start off first with the types of zoning commission cases. And the first being the text amendment, which is a petition to change the text of the zoning regulations. And this follows the rulemaking procedures. And just briefly, this means that there are no parties to this type of case. And once proposed action is taken, then the text is actually published in the DC Register for a 30-day comment period, which means the record reopens and the public is allowed to provide its comments to the proposed text that is published, that language that's published. The map amendment can be either a rulemaking or a contested case. And this is a petition or an application to change the zone designation of a property. And this also includes adding a new zone district, which can be done. Next slide. The plan unit development, PUD, is a review process for larger developments to ensure high quality development and public benefits. Campus plans, special exception review for large institutional uses such as universities and hospitals. And then design review is a review of a building, structure, or use that warrants special attention due to a particular or unique characteristic of an area or project. You see this like in the Capitol Gateway area, the Southeast Federal Center area. So those would be design review cases. Airspace development, this is the review of development of an airspace above public streets or alleys. Next slide.
So with the BZA, compared to the zoning commission, the BZA really hears a lot more cases for projects throughout the district. And the two most common types are special exception and variance applications. So a special exception is a request to waive or deviate from an area or use requirement that is permitted in a zone, subject to specified criteria or conditions that are actually outlined in the zoning regulations. So with a special exception, the regulations will state that this type of deviation or waiver of the zoning regulations is permitted as long as XYZ criteria are met. All special exception applications are also subject to general criteria, which Matt with the Office of Planning kind of briefly talked about, where the applicant has to show how the relief request will not have any adverse impacts and is still in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning regulations and map. A variance case can be a use variance, which is relief from the use requirements of a zone, or an area variance, which would be relief from the development or measurement standards of a certain zone. So like I mentioned earlier, height, yards, floor area ratio, et cetera. Like a special exception, a variance is a request to waive or deviate from an area use requirement, but unlike special exception applications, it's not outlined in the regulations. So if the regulations don't specifically state if a request can be allowed by special exception, then it would be considered a variance and is therefore subject to stricter criteria that the applicant must meet in order for the board to approve. And the three main criteria are listed here. So an applicant needs to explain what is exceptional or unique about the property, how that uniqueness causes practical difficulty or hardship, and that it would not cause substantial detriment to the public good or intent of the zoning regulations. Next slide.
So there's a couple different types of notices of cases. The very first one is for most of the cases that are going to have hearings, there is a notice of intent, which is sent out prior to a case being filed. And that's done at least 45 days prior to the case being filed. And that is sent to owners within 200 feet of the property. Then the notice of the application. At the time the applicants file their application, they must also serve the affected ANC or ANCs at the time that they file that application with our office. Then there's a notice of public hearing. We provide the notice of public hearing on contested cases and also rulemaking cases to the affected ANC and for contested cases, owners of property within 200 feet. And that property list is usually provided, or it is provided to us by the applicants. And they usually get that list of owners from the Department of Tax and Revenue, because who else would have the list of owners but them? And then the notice is also posted on the property. And this is just a picture of what our signs look like. So maybe a little more orange than the picture is showing, but that is posted at least in the zoning commission case. It's 40 days prior to the hearing. Kira, what is it for BZA?
So the notice actually isn't posted, it's posted at least 15 days before the hearing.
Okay, so the signs are
BZA
posted
cases.
15 days prior. Okay, so you can go to the next slide now. Kira, you want to finish that up?
Yeah, so the last few slides here, just wanted to provide a little bit more information on how you all can get more information or participate. So a note on our hearings, they're still virtual through WebEx. You can also watch on YouTube or listen via the phone. We do ask if anyone plans on testifying to sign up in advance. This helps us have a list of people who plan on being public witnesses, and our hearing administrator is able to pull people up quickly. It also lets you take the oath virtually online. Next slide. Some of the virtual hearing procedures, and these were established during the emergency legislation around the pandemic, but they still are in place today. So we encourage you to sign up in advance to testify. We don't allow live video during testimony. You can show video, you can submit a video exhibit to the record, but you can't walk around your neighborhood while you're testifying. And then if you do have technical difficulties while trying to testify, we do allow requests to reopen the record to allow a written testimony in after the hearing or the record has been closed. And then the last point, this is also a new rule that came about during the pandemic, but all submissions except for official ANC reports must be submitted at least 24 hours prior to the hearing. And if they're submitted late, then we ask that the person submitting them requests that the zoning commission or BZA allow them into the record at the actual hearing. So those are some of the virtual hearing procedures for both the BZA and zoning commission. You can go to the next slide. So the interactive zoning information system, this is where you would go to look up a case if you have a case number or even just an address, or if you just wanted to see what cases are located in your ANC, you can go to this link and click go to case records and search for those. If someone wants to actually upload documents, submit a letter in support or provide any testimony, then you would actually go to this other link where you would log in to the ISIS system. You can go to the next slide. Our zoning map, this is another great resource, and all of these links are on our website. I'll show a picture in a second. But this is a really good way to see just kind of how the different zones that are broken down throughout the city. You can also go really specific and look at specific squares and lots and see what cases that might be nearby. You can draw a buffer to see what cases are within 200 feet of a property. So it's again a really great resource visually if you wanted to look and see what's nearby. Next slide. And then, like I said, our website has all of this information. This is where you would go to watch a hearing, sign up to testify, look at the calendar of cases, look at the regulations, look at the map. So we're happy to share this presentation with you all afterwards if you wanted to, or you have it already, but you're welcome to share it with everyone. So you have the links there, but so yeah, that's our website. And then I think the last slide yep, just some contact information for all of us. If you have any questions, and we're happy to obviously take questions later tonight as well.
Great. Thanks, Kara. Thanks, Sharon. That was a great overview. And we will, just for those in the call, we'll share the slides out afterwards so that folks can dig into those a little deeper. And I think across the planning and the zoning teams, they gave a really great overview of some of the kind of the major framework that guides development across the city and in Brookland in particular. And to sort of round that out, wanted to invite Caroline Petti, former BNCA president, to talk a little bit about sort of how the BNCA and how Brookland neighbors have been involved in planning efforts previously, especially around the comprehensive plan, small area plan, et cetera. So I will turn the mic over to Caroline, and then we'll have a time for a couple of questions. I know there have been some in the chat. So Caroline, over to you.
Okay, very good. Can you hear me? Good. Hello, everybody, Brookland neighbors and guests of BNCA's meeting tonight. Appreciate this opportunity to be here. I am quite a long time Brookland resident. My husband and I have been here since 1992. And so we've seen quite a bit of changes over that period of time. When we first moved here, Brookland had not been discovered largely. It was a little bit down in the heels, 12th Street, quite a bit down in the heels back then. There were some crime issues. And the neighborhood really hadn't been discovered. But the fact of those circumstances meant that, relatively speaking, it was an affordable place to buy and to live. And so that was a key factor in our decision to locate here, is we were able to find a house that we really liked. And it was affordable and had a lot of other benefits as well. The metro, the community spirit, the diversity of the neighborhood, and so on. So we've lived here since then, and I think there's a very good possibility we'll be living here for the rest of our lives. It wasn't until about 2007 that development issues started to take off in the neighborhood. And it started, of course, with Catholic University's Monroe Street Market area, which was really the first large-scale development to occur in and around Brookland. But that set off a real flurry of interest in Brookland and this area, and possibly developing here. And it was also around that time that the Office of Planning initiated its small area planning process for the Brookland CUA metro area. And that was an 18-month long process that didn't involve BNCA per se, but many members that I know are still members, myself included, were involved in that process. And that was really my entry into the world of planning, zoning, and development. And I've been involved in that world as a neighborhood advocate ever since. I became president of the Brookland Civic Association in 2009, and I served in that capacity until 2013. And for a good deal of that period, development issues were front and center. And I would have to say, Kathy and Steve, I'm sorry, but they continue to be front and center. And if anything, it's gotten way more intense than it was during my tenure there. So I was going to go through a list of some of the pending developments in and around, well, in Brookland, but I think you all are familiar with them. So in the essence of time, I won't do that, and I'll just skip right to the development that has taken center stage probably most recently, although there are a number of them, but the one most recently is the proposed development around the WMATA Brookland Metro Station. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about that, and then I have some suggestions for BNCA about how to deal with some of the issues as I see them affecting that WMATA development. First of all, I think it needs to be said, and maybe Kathy, you may have said this a little earlier, but we really don't know at this point in time any of the details about development that's going to be proposed around the metro station. All we know is that WMATA right now is seeking comment on the.
Sorry, Caroline, could I just jump in for a second? Because I want to be mindful of kind of flow of how we're doing things here, because I know Kathy wanted to, after this, to talk specifically about feedback on the WMATA proposal. So I'm wondering if you don't mind, what I'd suggest here is, why don't we take a couple of questions for our guests from the Office of Planning and the Office of Zoning, and then come back and really focus the last couple of minutes of the meeting on the WMATA proposal in particular, because I know there's lots of strong feeling around that.
Yeah, I had some things I wanted to say about not so much the transit proposal on the table, but the future development. If you I could just get into that just a little.
Yeah, well, I think the way that Kathy had framed it up is touching on all of that, because I think a little bit on the transit proposal, but more what are the principles that we think should guide the remainder of the larger development, I would say.
That's fine.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Caroline. There are a couple of questions in the chat, which I can go to, but I wanted to just open it up first. Anyone have questions for the folks from the Office of Planning or the Office of Zoning? Kathy, I'll call on you.
Sorry. Thanks, Steve. So I'm not quite sure how to frame the question, and I'm not really sure who it goes to, but so anybody of the panelists who has a response. But somebody mentioned 12th Street earlier, or a few people mentioned 12th Street and the kind of historic main street of Brookland, which Caroline just mentioned was a little down in the heels of 30 some years ago, but has undergone a lot of change in recent years. And and some of it, I'm not sure if everybody agrees, but I have heard from a number of our members and neighbors and stuff, don't really like, kind of where 12th Street, mainly between Perry and Monroe streets. And I guess my question is, there's the pop-ups and sort of apartments, the facades of the older buildings have been destroyed, and completely different looking buildings gone up. I assume those are matter of right. And though it is not a historic district, or the buildings are not don't have historic preservation per se, but I'm just wondering if there's any way in the process to have any input, the community or community organizations to have any input into the design of some of those smaller developments, projects, or if it's just not. Let's see.
I can try and answer that first, and then if any of my colleagues want to weigh in. When a case like that, first of all, it may be a matter of right, it may not need any zoning relief. In that instance, I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for public input. For those projects that do go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment, the public can comment. Any BZA case is a public process with a public hearing. The board, however, is sometimes limited by the criteria of the zoning regulations as to what they can look at. For example, there was a case recently that needed relief for the amount of parking they were providing. That doesn't really allow the board to get into things like appearance or materials. They're looking strictly at, does it meet the criteria for parking relief? So there are some limitations on what the board will discuss when it comes to those sorts of cases. But other cases, they may very well take that sort of comment into account. It just depends on what type of relief the applicant is seeking.
And I can say from the preservation point of view, as you mentioned, that those blocks of 12th Street are not a historic district. I do recall that, oh gosh, it was probably 15 years ago. We did have some discussions with the community in Brookland about the possibility of a small historic district there that would cover that commercial strip. Nothing ultimately came of it, although we do have a pending landmark application for the Masonic Hall on file in our office. Perhaps a sort of comparable situation to point out maybe is in Chevy Chase, where with the recent small area plan up there, there was a discussion in the community about ways to protect the character of their commercial strip in Chevy Chase. And part of that discussion was the discussion of whether or not, at least among some people, whether or not there could be a historic district there for the commercial strip. So it's a little bit of an analogous situation. I'm not familiar enough with the comp plan or the planning principles that have been applied to that strip, and Matt, you would be more familiar than I would be with what the zoning allows. But in terms of preservation, if there's not a preservation designation, then we just have no say in it, other than commenting if there are cases that do have to go to the zoning commission. And in that case, we would be able to work with Matt's office about giving advice on any preservation issues that were involved in a particular case.
Thank you.
And I'm very mindful of time because we're almost at 8 p.m. And I see that there are a couple of other questions in the chat. I think with a deference to everyone's time, what I'd like to do is collect some of these. I'll follow up with the Office of Planning and the Office of Zoning staff who are on this call to just to get some responses, and we can share those out when we share the summary from the meeting here. I want to, I know this is an after hours assignment for those folks, so I want to make sure that we keep them under an hour and also have a little bit of time to move on to discussing the Metro proposal. So I guess I would just like to close in thanking David and Matt and Kira and Sharon for meeting with us tonight. I think giving us a lot of really helpful background and information. If you'll indulge me, I might have a couple of follow-up questions to send your way. But again, we really appreciate you spending some time with the community to talk about the work that your offices do. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. If I could just say one thing, our website, the Office of Zoning website, has a lot of information. And one thing that we've just recently been doing, we're trying to have a DCOZ university, but we've put some e-learning things on there. So if you're not familiar, say, for example, with our map, there's now an e-learning, we find that people are very, they like that better than just having, instructions to read. And so our IT person has done a wonderful job with that. And our handbook has recently been updated too with the new zone names. So please check out the e-learning. If you're not familiar with our map has a lot of information. It runs reports for you. So you can do the 200-foot radius, 500-foot radius to find out what ANCs, SMDs, that type of information zone. So check it out. A lot of information on our website.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. And I will second that plug. Having doing some prep on the website in advance of this meeting, there's a huge amount of information there. And I think once you get oriented to it, it is a really powerful tool. So, and we'll share the deck and those links out. And I think what we'll also do is package up some of that so that people in the community can go and know where to find the Brookland specific things and get an understanding of the zoning around here. So again, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And with that, Kathy, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to meet with you all.
David, appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Kira, thank you.
Okay, great. So the next part, and we are uncharacteristically going to go a little bit longer so that we can have time to get some input from you all on the WMATA proposal. Just Caroline started to go into it just as a little bit more background. The WMATA is soliciting input. There was a hearing last Monday, a week ago last Monday, at Luke C. Moore, and I did provide in-person feedback on behalf of the BNCA and others here probably testified, Caroline, one of them. But there's an opportunity to provide written feedback by the 24th, or the 22nd. So we'd like to get some input so we can incorporate that. And I will just share, and I'm just going to make a comment. Thank you, Magdalena. I see your comment there. To kind of frame this, just share this is kind of the guiding principles that we're using to sort of frame the feedback we have so far. And part of this comes from a meeting that we had over a year ago when we first heard about the WMATA strategic plan that included references to development at the Brookland station. And that was a great meeting, got a lot of input from folks, and this really kind of reflects that. These principles reflect the feedback and also what I shared last Monday. With that, I'll open it up, and Caroline, sorry, Steve.
I was just going to say, I mean, to echo and maybe lead into Caroline's points. Yeah, the Metro's current request for feedback around the proposed changes is fairly narrow, right? It's to the changes at the transit station, but those changes are simply as a precursor to development. So we wanted to get we wanted to start kind of defining what Brookland, or what the BNCA at least wants to see, both in terms of process and outcomes from the development, from any future development, so that we kind of communicate that to WMATA early, but also start engaging with like Councilmember Parker's office and other the ANCs to get some kind of consensus around this is what any development there should look like. So those principles kind of go beyond just the specific changes and try to think about it, for where this is going to go in the future. And with that, I will cede it back to, I know Caroline has some thoughts to share.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I do have a couple of thoughts. Not so much related to the specific transit proposal that Metro has put before us, but probably broader than that, and in anticipation of the next stage, which is when we start to see more details about development proposals. And I guess the first thing that I would like to recommend for BNCA is that I think it's very important that BNCA clarify from WMATA what the process for the development proposals will consist of from here on out, after the transit changes are settled on. What's the process going to look like, and when will there be opportunity for public engagement in that process? I think my impression at this point is that is unclear. I know what history has shown and the historical process they've followed. And if history's any guide, then the next step in this process will be probably sometime early next year, and it'll involve WMATA issuing an RFP, whereby a request for proposals, whereby they solicit developers for specific proposals for development around the metro properties. That's what's happened in the past, both at Brookland and at other stations, and that's probably what will happen here. And if that's the case, I think BNCA needs to make every effort to get a hold of the draft RFP before it goes out. Because the draft RFP is going to address things like zoning changes, whether the project's going to proceed as a PUD or a simple map amendment, matter of right type thing, protection of the Brookland Green. All of those things and more will be addressed. It'll be the conditions for the developers' proposals. And BNCA can have an influence on those conditions. And we have in the past, and we should in this instance as well. The second thing I want to say is that BNCA needs to come to grips with whether, in this instance around the Brookland Metro, whether it prefers a PUD approach to this project or a map amendment. The small area plan for the metro area gives real leverage and support for proceeding with development through a PUD process there. So that's leverage BNCA could use if that's the route it wants to go. But there are pros and cons associated with both types of processes. I mean, when it comes to a PUD, probably the strongest pro is that it involves community engagement. It involves the ability to negotiate over benefits and community amenities. But the trade-off for that kind of engagement is that there's the potential for more height and more density than neighbors might be comfortable with. So that's a trade-off that needs to be considered. With respect to a map amendment process, thanks to the Office of Planning's Inclusionary Zoning Plus program, a map amendment approach could involve more affordable housing, which many people believe is important. But it also could mean the trade-off would be that there's less public engagement opportunity. So regardless, there are pros and cons, and they ought to be discussed. And if BNCA has a preference, it should make that preference known as soon as possible to the powers that be. And then lastly, it's not too early to be thinking about the amenities BNCA is interested in with respect to this project, and the features that it's interested in with respect to this project. Things like affordable housing, how much, at what level of affordability, what size units, family size or otherwise. Things like the quality and the architectural appearance of the new development. Do we want something more like Fort Totten and what's around Fort Totten now, or Rhode Island Row? Or would we prefer something more like the Monroe Street Market development, a higher quality development, perhaps more in keeping with the character of the neighborhood? Things like height limits, use limits, the types of retail that there may be certain types of retail we would just as soon not see there. So the small area plan speaks to community amenities that the community in 2009 were interested in. And whether or not that's still the case today, the community has changed. But I would encourage folks to really look at the small area plan and look at some of the amenities that were discussed then. Things like undergrounding the utility lines, things like there was an interest in building a pedestrian biker bridge closer to the Brookland Metro across the Metropolitan Branch Trail. All sorts of things that are in that plan that may still be the community may still be interested in. And then lastly, I would say that BNCA needs to come to grips with how it will go about deciding what its priorities are and what the amenities are going to be for these projects. And I would encourage, I'm strongly in favor of a very democratic approach to the process that involves the members, ideally nominating priorities, nominating amenities, discussing them, the pros and cons, and then ultimately voting and ranking those. What you get in the end is a set of priorities that you can truly represent as democratically selected by members of the BNCA. When it came to 901 Monroe, we used the old-fashioned approach. We had the paper, the big paper on the walls, and people putting their priorities on, and then everybody got stickers and went around the room and put stickers, and the ones with the most stickers became our priorities that we lobbied for. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Caroline. Really helpful. And we will be tapping into your expertise
Happy to help
as we go forward. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other feedback, comments, feedback specifically on the transit proposal? Any reactions to what Caroline shared? Any of the principles we shared? I see Mary Elizabeth's feedback on the transit proposal. Thank you, Mary Elizabeth.
Welcome.
Michael.
Yeah, what Carolyn said got me thinking about the approach that BNCA is taking to this whole MATA development, and I can't help but notice that there's at least one ANC commissioner on this call, and it strikes me that Carolyn's right in terms of being organized and democratic, but coordinating with the relevant ANC commissioners as well as Zachary Parker's office so that everybody's hitting them with a consistent message would be more likely to have an influence on how this goes than if we all work at it separately. So is there work happening to sort of do that, make that sort of coordination happen?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we definitely have talked about engaging with Zachary Parker's office. We've we haven't gotten with any of the ANC commissioners yet on the WMATA, but that's a good suggestion. And who is the commissioner that's on? I don't see.
Ra.
It's me,
Ra,
Kathy.
Ra, sorry.
Yeah, and WMATA, the majority of the WMATA CUA project is in 5B04, the SMD that I represent, and this is why I'm here tonight to hear what the concerns and priorities of the BNCA is, and and I think that we know from history, from past experience, that at least 5B04 and the BNCA has, when Dan was president over there, that's one of the things that we were committed to do, work together and have a strong community engagement process. And I think that we definitely showed that when we went through the Hanover Reed Street project. And that was acknowledged by, the Zoning Commission, DDOT, OP, everyone, and even Caroline said in the end that community engagement process should be made a blueprint for what community engagement could be. So I'm here, I'm the commissioner now, and this project is down the road, but as long as I'm sitting in this seat, that it will be a transparent and fully engaged community process between 5B04.
Great. Thank you, Ra. Appreciate it. Sorry, I didn't see it. Got a lot of squares. That's good. Thanks a lot, Ra.
Kathy, this is Renee. I put
Renee.
it in the chat and you can't see my hand raised because my video was blocked.
Okay. Sorry. What was your comment?
My comment, I put a message in the chat that gives the link where anybody can send a comment up until 5 p.m. on Friday about the WMATA issue.
Yes, I think there's a typo in your link, but yes, people can still submit until Friday.
It has to be in there by 5 p.m. on Friday.
Yes, thank you.
Kathy?
Caroline, yeah.
But I have a specific comment about the transit proposal.
Okay.
And this didn't really come up. I was at the hearing last week and it didn't come up in a big way. But since I've talked to a couple of people, including folks that are associated with DCTV and the Brooks Mansion over there, and there's a concern about the 4 bus bays that are planned for the Newton Street extension between 10th and the entrance to the metro, which are going to block the entrance into the front of the historic landmark, the mansion. And also that extension, that Newton Street extension, is one of the main pedestrian routes for Brookland neighbors and families to enter the metro property and go to the station. And with the 4 bus bays and the size of the structures that they'll have to build for the benches and the cover from the weather cover, it's just going to make that area, and then buses going in and out and in and out, it's going to make that area very crowded. And also several people have mentioned to me that there's a good possibility if they go forward with those 4 bus bays there, they're going to probably have to shave a piece off of the Brookland Green, that leg that ends up there at Newton. So what people are talking about is, instead of putting the bus bays there, perhaps considering the possibility of moving them to Bunker Hill Road, to between 10th and the metro entrance, moving them there, so that which would enable buses to exit out on 10th and turn right, or exit out past the Comcast and the parking garage out there and turn right onto Michigan Avenue. I haven't really studied it myself, but I feel compelled to bring that up as a pretty major comment that I've heard.
Thanks. And I don't know exactly that right now there are shuttle buses that go to and from the parking garage there, and tent along Comcast, where Comcast and the that collision repair place is also a little tricky, and that intersection right there is a tricky intersection at 10th, Michigan, Bunker Hill, whatever it is.
It is.
But yes, but the concerns about the Newton extension, I think those are valid.
Yeah, and you would still have some of that trickiness with buses turning left off of Newton, and having to hit that intersection. It's a very tricky intersection.
Yes. Thank you. Anybody else have any specific or general feedback? We, as Caroline, suggested, in terms of, after the feedback, written feedback on this, we will be communicating about, engaging with you all on getting, I think Caroline suggesting getting input on priorities for, the future development and amenities and how we want that process to go. So, stay tuned for that. But anyway, I don't want to keep folks if yeah, Chris, you have your real hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah. Big question for this. Can you hear me?
No, unfortunately, you're cutting up.
No.
That might be a little better.
Unmute.
Try.
Okay. Can you hear me?
You're going in and out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. My big concern is traffic. Okay. I'll
Okay, send me. I heard your big concern is traffic. If you would email anything more about that, but yeah, that's a big one that we definitely want to address. Well, feel free to email anything before, let's say Thursday, if you have any other thoughts. Amanda/Dan, not sure who that is, but you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Thanks. Sorry, I don't want to keep people too long here.
No, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Great. Yeah. I echo a lot of what Caroline said and Ra. I was actually just looking at this schematic a little bit more on Mamada's website, and I certainly hear and I share Caroline's concern after looking at this a little bit more closely in terms of the way the bus only configuration is there, how that might affect pedestrian traffic, how it would require, looks like a pretty significant redo of the parking situation around the Brooks Mansion area. So yeah, there does look like there could be a lot here that the community might not be too happy with, and so I do encourage. I think in this case, given where we are and the fact that you only have a few more days to get comments in, I guess my feeling might be better safe than sorry in terms of registering concerns, and then we can obviously back off from those or discuss them further. But it might be worthwhile to lay some strong markers early on about the level of community interest here, in terms of what they're proposing. The only other thing I was going to say about the building, obviously the buildings that they're contemplating are not currently on the table, but would be coming down the road. The only thing I would say, obviously, I think there's a lot of different interests that community members will have. I think what worked well with Hanover was the project that Ra mentioned, that we worked on together over the last couple of years before I finished up as the president. I think it really came down to finding a balance among a number of different kind of competing priorities. People want density, walkability, affordability, green building, but not too many parking spaces, right? So there's all these things that are good things to have. And I think it does come down to sort of, rather than saying, any one thing is the top priority of the community, oftentimes it's more about, trying to find a balance among those multiple good things that each contain trade-offs with one another. And I think BNCA's role in that should really be, to sort of try to be a voice of reason and moderation within the community and synthesize, because people are going to come with those different interests and priorities. But I think the job of the organization will be to try to, meld those and synthesize those into a reasonable outcome. And then just the very last thing I want to point out, which I just happened to have a little bit of taste of this when I was, a few years ago as president. They had at one point approached. There had been an RFP, as Caroline mentioned, and there was a little bit of movement towards developing the WMATA space before it kind of, for whatever reason, just fell by the wayside until now. But I at one point, I think it was, I can't remember if it was MRP or Atlantic, but there was a developer who I think WMATA selected, and they had sort of a mock-up of a proposal for this building that would go over where the current kiss and ride is. The one thing that I recall from looking at that, and this was many years ago now, but also just it kind of looks like the same thing is going on here. It didn't seem like the building that they were contemplating that would sort of border the green was particularly well integrated with the green. It sort of seemed like they were protecting the green as an afterthought, or like because Councilmember McDuffie and WMATA had, there had been this political engagement that occurred at that time with BNCA's involvement, and there was an agreement at that point to protect the green. But when I was looking at the schematic, it really struck me that they were doing the bare minimum there, and there was no real effort to integrate the green, enhance the green, preserve it in a way that made it more of a attractive park space. It was just sort of like the backyard almost. It looked like they had put like the air conditioning compressors on the back of the building, right? So it didn't look like there was any real thought given to, how to integrate a new building there, which for I think is not a bad idea to have some building there. I think it's not a bad place for some infill development, but really pushing them to think about how to integrate that with the green and thinking about the existing residences. That's where I think the community and BNCA also should really just be very, very attentive, and not satisfied and not sort of settle for good enough. Because I think if they do it right, it could be a really good project there.
Great, thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate it. All good points. Okay, well, we are coming to the end here. So again, if you have any other thoughts, please email them to brooklandcivic@yahoo.com. Normally we give the last few minutes for community announcements. I don't see Oliver from the council member's office, but Magdalena Acevedo from the U.S. District Attorney's Office was on earlier. She shared, I'm shifting gears here a little bit. She shared things. Okay, hold on one sec, that I'd like to share, that there is a trial set for the man accused of killing Karan Blake. That's April 8th, 2024, and there's a status hearing for that case, November 17th, 2023. Also, she shared that there are updates on 2 other homicides in the neighborhood. The one at 600 block of Monroe, somebody was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, held without bond, and there's a preliminary hearing on October 4th. And then another person was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for killing a teacher on the CUA campus. I think that was a visiting a teacher who happened to be in DC, and that person, the accused, waived their preliminary hearing, and there's a status conference on January 12th. So anyway, just wanted to share those updates on some of the serious crimes that have happened in our neighborhood. There's a hand raised iPhone. Is that you, Oliver?
Yeah, this is Oliver.
Hi.
So we're here for Ward 5 Day at the Nats Park.
Oh.
So I just wanted to definitely let you guys know that our office is committed to working with ANC 5B04 Commissioner and BNCA when it comes to the WMATA development.
Great.
I know you guys are probably hearing a lot of stuff in the background, but what I could do is I could send you some of the updates that we have on our side, and we can share that with the community members that are in this meeting.
Excellent. Thank you so
if
much.
That's okay.
Yeah, and thank you, Oliver. Appreciate your dedication during the Nats game. Go Nats. But yeah, we'll appreciate getting that information. So thank you very much. Okay.
Yes, no problem. And also, I wanted to just give you guys an update. We passed the legislation to make social work free for UDC. We did some of the historic landmark voting today as well. And that is about it. I'll send you guys everything else on the slide.
Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot, Oliver. Oliver, really appreciate it.
And Kathy, the 5B, ANC 5B meeting is tomorrow evening, and I'm sure Oliver will be there giving an update as well.
Awesome.
Updates.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. If there aren't any other announcements at the moment, I really appreciate everybody sticking around and at least listening to, if not, contributing comments to this important topic. And thanks, Steve, for organizing the panel. Good evening.
Thanks all. Good night.
Steve, thanks, Kathy.
Good night.
Thanks, Caroline.
Good night, everyone.